Do you remember? Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. This is Jim Cordero, and I'm your host for Do You Remember? This is your San Pedro PirateTownRadio.com show that's going to give the local San Pedro citizenry a chance to talk it up and let us know a little something about themselves. This is a chance for you to let us know, to let the town know what it is that you've done in your life. Big events, little events, where have you been? Many of you have a lot of stories to tell, and we want to hear them. Today we're down here at 8th and Pacific at Cafe Port Town, once again part of PirateTownRadio.com, and I'd like to ask you a question. Do you remember Christmas in 1976? Many of you, of course, listening aren't going to remember that because you're in your 20s and early 30s, but those of you probably in your late 30s and 40s, 50s, you're going to remember your childhood Christmases. You might remember 76 in that time. I do. Large family. I came up with 8 kids in my family and living up by Dotson Junior High. It was a beautiful sight, crisp, clear skies. Had the chance of looking around San Pedro and you see all of the beautiful decorations in the Park Western Plaza, snowmen, Santa Claus, waiting for all those great things to come, and of course, waiting for school to be out. I remember a particular Friday evening back in 76 in December when everything was going just right. Everything was going perfect. And then it happened. Family came over? No. Santa came early? No. What happened was from our house up on Sansinena, looking over the harbor, the entire side of our house shook with violence. An explosion. It felt as if something had been placed on the side of our house and we were under attack. Do you remember that? Do you remember the SS Sansinena? Friday evening, December 17th, 1976. It was a clear and beautiful evening sky. The red, green Christmas lights reflecting off the rooftops. It was beautiful. Those of you who live in Upper San Pedro, as we might call it, have a beautiful view of the harbor. And yet that night you knew, like we all did, that something was wrong. It wasn't just the violence of the explosion, it was the smoke plume that covered the harbor. Even at night, obviously could be seen. That was what happened with the SS Sansinena. And the events that took place that evening are going to be told to us, are going to be recounted for us by Assistant Chief Lou Rupoli, LAFD Harbor Area. He's a citizen of San Pedro, longtime citizen of San Pedro, but former battalion chief here in San Pedro. And what I'd like to say first is welcome, Chief. How are you?
Thank you, Jim. Thanks for having me.
And what I'd like to get a little bit first of is why don't you let folks know a little bit about yourself and about your service. My understanding is that you and your family, extended and your direct family, I used to work for your brother with the LAPD, have about 200 years plus of service for the city. That's incredible. Why don't you give us some information on that?
Yes, Jim, that's correct. My great uncles, the Duraco brothers, three of them were port pilots down here, served the city for many, many years, retired back in the early 60s. And my brother Rich and I both decided to work for the city as well. We tested around the same time. LAPD and LA Fire were testing the same day at Hollywood High School, and I kept looking over at Rich when he was standing in line and yelling at him and telling him, "You're in the wrong line, you're in the wrong line." And 31 years later, we're both working for the city. As you know, he's a deputy chief, special operations for LAPD, and myself, an assistant chief with the fire department. But my great-grandparents settled here in the early 1880s, opened up one of the first fish markets, California Fish, years back. And I got to tell you, I'm proud to be a San Pedro citizen, proud to be here today, and to be a part of Pirate Town Radio.
Oh, that's great. And I know you've got some really, really interesting stuff that you're going to share with us at the end of the interview here. And I have to tell you, I mean, I very much enjoyed working for your brother here in the LAPD. And I remember also going and standing in that 2-hour line at Hollywood High School to take our application test for the LAPD. Never thought I'd, get through, but it did. Anyway, it's really amazing what you have just told us. The fact that so many, and some of you who I know have listened to some of our earlier broadcasts have known a little bit or have learned a little bit about my family history going back to the Civil War and the drum barracks. So many of you out there have long-time connections to San Pedro, and we need you and we want you to come up and let us know. So we'll talk to you down here at Cafe Port Town. Give us a call at some point, let us know, or just stop in. 8th and Pacific. Get some good Croatian and Italian coffee, maybe a biscuit. Okay, Chief, you tell me that now at this point, back in December of 1976, you had about 1 year on the job with LAFD. Now, mind you, we all know that it's a tough job, but coming up at that time, you probably came up with some pretty hard-nosed characters on the fire department at the time. How was your probation period at that point?
Well, I think as a young rookie firefighter years back, it was difficult. There's no bones about that. However, I think if I had to do it all over again, I would. The fire department has been a very exciting career, a rewarding career, and I think that there's nothing more rewarding than to preserve a human life. And throughout the career of a firefighter, you seem to do that from time to time. When the public at times is running from danger, firefighters are running to danger, and sometimes having to pay the ultimate sacrifice, and that is of their life.
Many have, and I know that you enjoy, not just from the people here in San Pedro, but from people all over the city, that the fire department is one of the premier departments in the country. And you've shown that many times over the last several decades. Your service, of course, and then, of course, the service of all members of our fire department. That evening, I know you remember it because we've talked prior to this. That evening, I know from here in San Pedro, local fire station 48, their rigs, their guys were out, I guess, on their third run when the explosion took place. And it's been quoted by Captain James Francis. Actually, he was the acting captain at the time, called the radio dispatch, or OCD, and said, quote, "We've had one hell of an explosion in the harbor." How do you remember getting the call at that point? Because, first of all, where were you?
I was working as a young firefighter at Fire Station 45, which was located at Olympic and Crenshaw, basically. And what happened was we got the call. When the dispatch came in, I knew that it was down in the harbor. I wasn't sure just the extent of it, but I knew for us to be moving up to the harbor, to going into a fire down here in the harbor, that it was a spectacular and catastrophic event. I remember we ran to the fire engine. At that time, we rode the tailboards. Now we don't ride tailboards, we're inside the cab, but at that time we rode the tailboard. I remember being on the tailboard with another firefighter. His name is Carl Crocus, who has since passed on, but he was one of the old-timers that kept me under his wing. And I remember getting on the Santa Monica Freeway, then onto the Harbor Freeway. We were flying down the freeway. We got onto Gaffey Street, and as soon as we got onto Gaffey Street, I'm on the tailboard, and I'm looking at both sides of the street to the east and west, and as we came down through 1st, 2nd, 3rd Street, responding red light and siren, every window was broken out into the street, and it was as if nobody was here. It was dead silent. I think people were in shock. As we approached the fire scene at 22nd and Signal, or Minor, I should say, we got an assignment to move into the fire, and as we laid our hose lines and got into the actual fire there where the explosion was, I can remember laying on the ground with a 2.5-inch hose line, shooting water at this superstructure that was on fire, that actually, when the ship exploded, the bow and the stern stayed in the water and sunk. However, the tips of them were up in the water, and the superstructure, the middle section of the vessel, actually exploded 200 yards away and landed on the guard shack 200 yards away. They never found the guard. The fireboats were all there making spectacular rescues. I know that they rescued 9 people and survived, and over 46 people from the large and smaller boats were rescued. I can remember laying on a 2.5-inch hose line, as I began to say, and there was a portion of a human body next to me, the rib cage portion, and it was terrible, to tell you the truth.
Well, I think the sites there, obviously, I want to get a little bit more into that, because I think it's important to understand how much stress could be laid upon a fireman or a policeman or any emergency responder in that type of situation, and yet the job comes first. Feelings and emotions have to be put aside, and the job has to be taken care of. Now, you said you're riding, and this is just something I think people really need to understand. You're moving at incredible rates of speed, hanging on to the outside of your fire truck.
That's right.
Right. That was the mode of transportation. You're on the freeway, and you guys are hauling backside down to the harbor. I think that in itself is a testament to the courage of our men and now women in the fire department. Fire Station 48, which was basically located at 16th and Grand, the individuals who were there, the firemen, have stated that every window of the second story, now I'm sure some of you can maybe remember that building, blown out. Windows across San Pedro, at least for a mile around and even farther, were reported to be blown out. And in all, we did have many people injured, actually 9 requiring serious, people who were not on the site, but required serious medical attention due to that broken glass. This was a tremendous explosion. Instantly, I understand that Fireboat, from what I was saying, it was Fireboat 5 that was stationed up somewhere near MacArthur Park. I'm sorry, Fort MacArthur. Was something they call, as I understand it, the lower reservation.
That's right.
Okay, how many fireboats? They were first to arrive, my understanding, and they were the ones who were primarily up front and pulled, I believe, from what the fire department archives state, 18 people off of the stern. 18 men were pulled to safety at that point by Fireboat 5. When you were there in the water, were there survivors out there in the water? Because my understanding that there were people being pulled from the water. Is this a situation where it might have looked like, and I'm sorry to say this, that we might recollect or review something like Pearl Harbor, the movie, and look at those scenes of the water actually on fire due to the oil and everything else? Was that the type of scene? The photos look that way.
Yes, the fire burned for 3 days. I was there for 3 days. I remember fireboats pulling the crew out of the water. I remember one of the captains on Fire Engine 101, which is located, the fire station's at 25th and Western, who was also one of the first arriving engine companies on scene, and that was Captain Aldo Zuliani. And one of the things that Captain Zuliani had mentioned, he says, of all my 30-year career, this was a particular fire explosion that not only was I able to be there to do some good, but in my 30 years, I actually used my Italian. I was able to speak to the crew in Italian and tell them where to go to stage themselves in safety. And he was able to get over to where the boats were and talk to them in Italian so they wouldn't be afraid and we could pull them up onto the boats.
That's amazing. The SS Sansinena was a Liberian tanker but had a mostly Italian crew. In my understanding, there was probably about 24 of them who were not on ship or not on board at that time, had actually gone ashore. There were many others that were having dinner and other things on board. Those were the ones that were pulled off. But being able to have someone there on scene who can direct these Italian sailors where to go, I mean, that's a testament to, one, the fire department, and also him, and a little bit to San Pedro. Is he your San Pedro resident?
Yes, and he was. He was born and raised here, along with his brothers and cousins, who some of them were on the fire department as well. You
gotta love it. Every language in the world is spoken here. So, you're there, and as you're describing it, we've got the superstructure. For those of you not quite understanding the way the tanker is set up, we're talking about the center of the tanker has actually been detached and blown out of the water and onto the docks.
That's correct. And nowadays, the tankers, as they're put together, each sheet of metal is actually welded. Back then, on this particular tanker, it was an older tanker, and the way they were constructed years ago, they were actually riveted together. The rivets were about 1.5 inches in diameter, and they were solid rivets, steel rivets, that were riveted every 3 to 4 inches on the sheets of steel. Well, when the ship blew, there was literally hundreds and hundreds of rivets everywhere. In fact, I remember quite a few of the firefighters. We took one just as a a remembrance, and I still have my rivet. But it was a real incredible explosion. I got to tell you that when you're down there, you're still unsure if there's going to be a secondary explosion. You're not sure how this all occurred. So the firefighters that actually, especially the ones that were first on scene, I have to hand it to them. They were able to set the scene, to set this incident up to be extremely successful, and they did a real good job.
Yeah, that's great. When I think our listening audience might want to take a moment and really think of this. Every portion of the ship in that explosion has the possibility of becoming a ballistic missile.
That's
Every
right.
one of those rivets and screws and bolts and chunks of metal becomes, if you will, it all in itself becomes a large shotgun shell. And you may be some part of ways. You may be down the street and all of a sudden, bap. And I know we've had stories and incidents of that, of pieces of metal and pieces of things landing throughout the lower end of San Pedro. So this really is an incredible explosion. And yes, you were possibly threatened, were you not, from things on the dock?
Right. There was a lot of sharp objects, metal, a lot of things from the ship. There was piping. And, by the way, the location of this was Berth 46. It's the outer harbor. And yet, when the explosion took place, there was droplets of oil that were all over San Pedro, as far as Long Beach, Wilmington, Harbor City, and I can tell you that it was like getting the blessing from the Pope, because everybody had oil on their cars, everybody had oil on the sidewalks, on their homes. It was everywhere.
That's amazing. And that oil in itself, as we talked about a moment ago, is going to be flammable when near the actual site, correct? I mean, that's why the water itself was on fire.
That's true.
And now, obviously, I don't think you're going to have that same effect, but who wants to get a big glob of crude oil, which is what had actually been already deposited offshore, correct? The crude oil from the tanker had already been removed.
That's correct. And that's what made it so flammable, is because inside the tanker itself, the fumes were very volatile. And normally when you're using tools on a tanker like that, you use brass tools so it doesn't cause any sparks. And we're not sure exactly what took place. There had been some talk that possibly they were not using brass tools. We just don't know at this time.
The SS Sansinena, of course, was, I believe, constructed in the late 1950s, so it would be constructed under those prior requirements that you talked about, which, of course, have all changed now, have they?
Yes. In fact, one thing that came out of this was the fire department and the Coast Guard, along with the Port of Los Angeles, and I have to hand it to the port. We all sat down and came up with a plan that every tank ship that comes into the harbor, we, the fire department, would inspect. It's called a tank ship inspection program. It came together March of 1978 when we got it completed. It's actually now law. It's within our municipal code, the fire code. So every time a tank ship to this day comes in the harbor, firefighters will go out at 3 in the morning, 2 in the morning, whatever it is, and will actually make a physical inspection of that ship to make sure that the ship is safe before it takes on fuel or gives off any type of fuel. We sign what's called a DOI, Declaration of Inspection. We give it to the captain, and we allow them then to go ahead and transfer fuel.
So they're technically already berthed at that moment. They're dockside before they can take anything off, correct?
That's right. We allow them to dock. They have to head in the direction of sea. They have to have a cable that's hanging 6 feet up off the water. So just in case they need to get towed, they have to fly a red, what we call Bravo flag, that tells everybody around that they're transferring fuel. And there's several other things that they have to do. But
no heaving lines, mooring lines, nothing like that yet? Or, I mean, as I said, they can't do a thing.
They cannot. They can go ahead and moor themselves, but they can't do any transfer. We have to take a look at everything that they're going to do. Yes, we allow them to hook up their lines, but there's no transfer. We make sure that when they begin to pump, there's no leakage, and everything is is just right.
Oh, that's great. For someone like myself, I'm not that, I did my time as a casual. I think it's the birthright of every San Pedro resident. But I spent some time down there, but I'm not all that, and I'm sure a lot of people here in town are not all that up to snuff in our knowledge of how these tankers work, and they're a huge part of our town. They're a huge part of our economy, and basically a huge part of our lives. So I think it's a good idea that we get an understanding that they are being inspected, that you guys are out there, you're doing your job, and it goes unseen. So maybe we need to acknowledge a little bit of that. You were there for 3 days.
That's right.
3 days. Where did you guys, when you needed to take your 2-3 hours, I'm sure that you got, where did you go to relax, to sleep, to do something?
Well, I remember being up for 24 hours. At one point, we would get relieved, and you just did the best you could. You slept up in the hose bed up on top for an hour or two, and then you get back on the hose line. One of the things that we did, we used what was called AFFF foam, and we lobbed foam mixed with water. This foam application would go over the hydrocarbon to smother the fumes, to stop the fire from burning. And I remember seeing hundreds of 5-gallon plastic containers of empty foam containers just heaped up in about a 75-foot pile, 100 foot by 100 foot, 75 feet high. It was pretty unbelievable.
All of that required. I understand we were probably talking about half a dozen fireboats involved, or were there more?
Well, the fire department has 5 fireboats. We have 103 fire stations to date. There's 9 fire stations down here in the harbor and 5 fireboat stations. Our largest fireboat at the time was fireboat number 2. It's named the Ralph J. Scott, and that fireboat served, it's just been retired, but it served 78 years down here in the harbor. At the time, it was about 50 years of service, and that fireboat was instrumental in being able to put large doses of water onto this superstructure that was burning, as well as the smaller boats pulling boom around this particular incident to keep the crude, the hydrocarbon, the foam from drifting out anywhere. They were able to contain it. And those 5 fireboats were used, all 5 of them. Fireboats 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5.
That's amazing. The particular boat that you were talking about, any idea where that is now? So is it retired? But I think it'd be something great to have down by the Maritime Museum.
It is. In fact, that's exactly where it is. We were able to pull it out of the water. I chaired a committee, the Ralph J. Scott Advisory Committee, and 2 years ago we were able to pull the boat out of the water with the help of the Port of Los Angeles. We've cradled it, and we're getting ready to actually display it in the next year or two as part of the second phase of the promenade, it should be housed on the north or south side of the fire station that's down there on 5th and Harbor Boulevard, Fire Station 112. Incidentally, that particular fireboat is the oldest serving fireboat in the United States of America. It served the city 78 years. It is a historical landmark, and incidentally, there's only 130 historical landmarks in California. There's 7 in the city of Los Angeles, and the Ralph J. Scott Fireboat 2 is one of those 7.
That is amazing and duly appreciated, and should be considered a state landmark and definitely a city landmark. I mean, this is something I know folks sometimes don't get a little excited about boats or about this or that, but as a historian, as a history teacher myself, I think it's very important that we acknowledge not just the people, but sometimes the tools that we use to get the job done. So it's very, very interesting. In that sense, talking about our fireboats, I was actually lucky enough about 2 years ago to see an exercise that was being performed by one of your new fireboats. Actually, it has a lot of new tools and things about it that are different from almost anything else being used in the United States. Is that true?
Yes, it is. In fact, when the Ralph J. Scott was retired, the Port of Los Angeles paid to rebuild, or actually 4 brand new fireboats. The Ralph J. Scott Fireboat 2, we replaced it with a new Fireboat 2, which is the most powerful fireboat in the world. It puts out 38,000 gallons a minute. It'll shoot a stream over the Vincent Thomas Bridge. And it's extremely important that we have that reach, because with 12 marine oil terminals in the harbor, 3 refineries, with some of the concerns that we would have, we need to be able to have that penetration and that reach. Also, the Port of LA was able to help us out with 3 of the smaller fireboats. Not only do they have powerful fire pumps, but they have a dive platform on the back, and each of the small fireboats have a mate and 2 divers that we can dive in the water and actually put hose lines in the waters with floats, and those divers can go up and under a dock to shoot water underneath the dock and also perform rescues in the water.
That's amazing. I think maybe the taxpayers in San Pedro, we might want to know what's the bill on that. I know we're getting our money's worth, but any idea?
Actually, the Port of LA paid for it, so I gotta hand it to them. They really stepped up to the plate. They wanted to make sure that security of this port was at the utmost for the community and for the people that are working down here. We have thousands of dock workers that are down here, and I think the Port of LA recognizes that the community is at a forefront to make sure that safety takes place. So it's a cheap insurance policy, but they put out over $10 million for all of these fireboats. The large fireboat was nearly $8 million, and the smaller ones were $500,000. And incidentally, Fireboat 2, the original Ralph J. Scott, that was built in 1925 and retired a few years ago, as I mentioned, served 78 years, was actually built right here in the harbor from LA Boat Works, which is located at the time where Todd Shipyard was in 1925. So that fireboat not only has served this community, but it was made and built right here in San Pedro.
Amazing, amazing. Actually, many of these things that you're letting us know are just fantastic. I think residents of the harbor should really take a moment and say the Port of Los Angeles is doing a great job on that aspect. I know sometimes we have problems, sometimes we don't agree politically about certain things, but the fact that they put up the money for this and it was for concern of the community is really, I think, a pat on their back, and I think we need to let them know that on occasion, that we do appreciate the things that are being done by the port. We're here with Assistant Chief Lou Rupoli, LAFD Harbor Area, and I understand that there are some new things on track for you folks, some things that you're working on, and I think you want to let us know about them, so go ahead.
Well, first of all, I think that my promotion to come back down to the harbor after serving as a battalion chief down here for 7 years was really a great thing for me. I think, I've got a heartfelt place here for the harbor. I want to see changes in public safety, and part of my job responsibilities is helping to put together, working with the community, a evacuation plan. And I'm working with cops, I'm working with LAPD, I'm working with the Coast Guard, with all the different agencies to actually put together a solid evacuation plan. Emergency preparedness is another one of my responsibilities that I'm working on. The CERT program. CERT stands for Community Emergency Response Teams. February and March we'll have a couple more classes. It's a 17.5-hour class where we actually teach the public. We invite you. It'll be out in the Daily Breeze on the dates, but we invite the public to come and get certified, get trained by the fire department in CERT training.
No, is this a new program? Something that's been started recently, or has it been going on for some time?
Back in the 70s, the Los Angeles Fire Department, under the direction of Assistant Chief Frank Borden, who's retired now, who is a San Pedro resident and is involved in the San Pedro Historical Society, which incidentally, not to go off track, but we have a harbor community museum, fire department museum, which is located underneath San Pedro City Hall. It's open on Saturdays from 10 to 3 p.m. It's an old fire station, number 36. There was a fire station under there, for those of you who don't know. There was a fire station and a police station underneath San Pedro City Hall. and they would respond out onto Harbor Boulevard years ago. Well, back when Rudy Savornitz was councilman, he helped me start working on the makings of being able to take back that particular fire station area and make it a museum. Janice Hahn came on scene, and boy, she grabbed the torch and ran with it. She saw this being a good thing for the harbor residents. So through Janice's direction, we were able to put a lid on this thing and get this harbor museum. So for your radio audience, please come down and visit the Harbor Museum on Saturdays from 10 to 3, and you probably will even meet Assistant Chief Frank Borden. But Frank Borden started this CERT program, and it went into California, and now it's nationwide, the CERT program, and we're also taking it across world boundaries. We're teaching it over in Japan and some of the other European countries. But the CERT program is a way that the community can come together and help the fire department and the police departments, law enforcement, whenever there is a large catastrophe that takes place anywhere in the city. But in the harbor in particular, the fire and police will be taxed, and we won't be able to manage a huge incident without your help, without the public's help. So if you're certified and trained, and those leaders can come down to the command post, and we can lay out a map and tell those CERT leaders, hey, this is the area we want you to check. Make sure the gas meters are turned off at the residents' homes. Tell us if there's anybody that needs medication. Tell us if there's anybody that needs oxygen or any ambulance or any glass windows that are broken out or any looting going on. And we'll actually give them some boundaries, and they will manage that area, because the fire department with 9 fire stations in the harbor won't be able to manage the whole harbor area. If there's a major earthquake, which is the #1 concern for us right now before terrorism, and we have a freeway down and we can't get resources, I can't tap into those 103 fire stations to bring some of them down like I did as a young rookie firefighter back when the Sansinena blew, then we have to depend on the harbor residents.
Ladies and gentlemen, I can't back up enough and support enough of what Chief Rupoli has just said. As a former law enforcement myself, I know that anytime there is a tactical alert anywhere in the city, everything kind of shuts down for a little bit. Even neighboring divisions may shut down for just a tad, or people be held over. When we do reach, and when it does happen, because it will, a larger emergency, something much larger than the SS Sansinena, whether it be terrorism or, as you said, earthquake, whatever it is, we're going to need citizens to step up. And what better way than to have them pre-organized and set up. Now, we are not looking necessarily for people with special skills. We're looking for regular citizens.
That's right. Some of the elderly that may not be able to perform some of these skills that we may want the younger generation to, they can still help. They can get brochures out for us. They can make phone calls. There's a lot of things that they can do, but I just want to encourage your radio listeners here at Pirate Town Radio to be encouraged and to make some of those CERT program training courses that we'll have at Peck Park, and not just at Peck Park, but throughout the communities of the harbor area.
I know that the leadership here at PirateTownRadio.com, that we are actually working now on citizen watch groups. And being part of this, I'm sure we'll get a lot of airplay. It'll get a lot of mention here on the radio and on the webcast. I also know that when it comes to the actual radio broadcast, there's something that you wanted to bring up about that connects Pirate Town Radio with the LAFD.
Yes, Jim. First of all, one of the other things that during a catastrophe, if our communications for any reason is knocked down, then we really depend on the ham radio operators. Well, here in the harbor area, Pirate Town Radio is actually going to be our radio station that we're going to tap into in order to alert the citizens of the harbor area what to do, where to go, if they should shelter in place, if they should go to a particular area, what particular areas of the city or of the harbor area we may evacuate. But Pirate Town Radio is an outstanding source, and it's really the pilot program for us in order to make the citizens aware of the catastrophes that possibly could alert the harbor areas.
A lot of work yet to be done, but definitely the LAFD and Pirate Town Radio connection is something that's going to be a benefit to the community in many, many ways.
Absolutely.
Chief, I'd like to say thank you very much for coming on down. This has been fantastic. You've enlightened us in many, many ways. Thank you for obviously your part in the SS Sansinena. And ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to say thank you for myself, Jim Cordero, your host for Do You Remember? Here at Cafe Port Town, 8th and Pacific in downtown San Pedro. Remember, listen up or log on, piratetownradio.com.